September 1944. Allied forces have Germany on her heels. Hitler's army has been in full retreat since D-Day. By the end of August, France is back under Allied control. But the Allied forces can only push Germany so far. Their supply lines are getting longer, while the Germans are getting shorter. Axis powers quickly resupplied, regrouped, and launched a series of counterattacks to defend every inch of Nazi territory. Both parties had their eyes on the German city of Aachen. Today, it's the 27th largest city in the country and home to about 250,000 people. Back then, it was a critical defensive asset on Germany's western border. If the Allies could take Aachen, it would open a door into the Ruhr Basin. From there, they could seize several dams that the Germans might use to flood the region and stall their advance toward Berlin. To prevent Germany from reinforcing Aachen from the south, the U.S. First Army under General Courtney Hodges set its sights on Hurtgen Forest, a 50-square-mile area between the Ruhr River and Aachen. Specifically, Allied forces wanted to capture Bergstein Castle Hill, a 1,300-foot slope that provided crucial sightlines in every direction. He who stood atop the hill could see their enemy coming from miles away. In war, high ground is crucial. Thousands of men from both sides were willing to fight and die over Bergstein Castle, also known as Hill 400. The thick trees provided cover from aerial assault, and the steep slopes made it nearly impossible to climb and shoot simultaneously. Those charging the hill were running into a meat grinder, a death factory as one American survivor would call it. But they all knew what they were fighting for. They knew how important Hill 400 was to the Allied plan. The 2nd Ranger Battalion answered the call. They charged into oncoming machine gun fire as German artillery exploded behind them. They scaled the slopes, claimed the top, and fought off wave after wave of German counterattacks. Their numbers dwindled, but their spirit held firm. For 40 grueling hours, the 2nd Rangers defended Hill 400 to their last breath. This is their story. On April 1, 1943, the 2nd Ranger Battalion mustered at Camp Forest, Tennessee. They were officially activated in September of the same year and deployed to Great Britain in preparation for Operation Overlord. They earned their stripes on D-Day during the assault of Pointe du Hoc, a strategic German outpost across the English Channel armed with a battery of French artillery. Allied forces feared the Germans would turn those guns on Omaha Beach. If D-Day was to go as planned, the 2nd Rangers needed to capture that battery no matter the price. On D-Day, 225 Rangers between Dog, Easy, and Fox companies set sail across the English Channel from Great Britain. A storm brewed overhead, and rough waters caused several of their landing crafts to capsize. Dozens of men drowned with their heavy gear before ever making it to France. They landed an hour late, thus ruining their element of surprise. The 190 remaining men used flimsy rope ladders to scale the coastal cliffs. Germans would have been standing atop and firing upon them if not for covering barrages from Allied battleships offshore. Those who reached the top fought through waves of German machine gun fire and finally reached their fortifications. There, they learned that their primary objective, the captured French artillery, had been moved. Time was of the essence, and the 2nd Rangers needed to seize or destroy those guns before they could fire upon their allies landing in Normandy. Luckily, a small patrol located the weapons about a mile away, hidden in an orchard and camouflaged by the trees. They used thermite grenades to destroy their firing mechanisms, thus saving hundreds, if not thousands, of American lives on the beaches of Normandy. Bud Lamell and Jack Kuhn, 2 decorated veterans of the 2nd Rangers, claimed they found the guns by accident while on patrol. "It was pure luck," he said during an interview after the war. "They were sitting in proper firing condition, ammunition piled up neatly, everything at the ready." After D-Day, the 2nd Rangers remained in Normandy, performing small missions and odd jobs. They eventually attached themselves to 7 Corps as the Allied army pushed into Brittany. They helped capture the port city of Brest and were battle-hardened by the attrition of deep forest combat. In a way, it prepared them for the fight of their life, the Battle of Hurtgen Forest and the assault on Hill 400. The Battle of Hurtgen Forest was the longest battle on German ground during World War II and the second longest battle ever fought by the U.S. Army behind the Battle of Bataan in the Pacific Theater. Hurtgen itself was a 50-square-mile strip of dense woods and rugged terrain. Every step risked death, as the woods and streets were laden with landmines, barbed wire, and hidden pillboxes. Allied forces arrived in September. Fall turned to early winter, and with it came bitter cold and light snowfall. The ground was wet and muddy, making it difficult to move. The skies were covered in low clouds, meaning Allied planes couldn't spot German targets. Even though the Allies had a numbers advantage, sometimes outmanning the German resistance 5-1, the weather and terrain leveled the playing field. Without question, Germany's most valuable asset in Hurtgen was Bergstein Castle Hill. The Allies called it Hill 400, referring to its height. Bergstein Castle stood 1,312 feet tall, or 400 meters on the dot. Its steepest slope was a 45-degree angle, equal to a low-end black diamond ski slope. The whole thing was covered in thick evergreen trees, and the Germans enjoyed a bird's-eye view of American movements from the top. They couldn't move an inch without the Germans knowing about it. The U.S. 9th Infantry Division arrived in Hurtgen in September 1944. They remained until mid-October, only gaining about 2 miles at the cost of 4,500 men. Meanwhile, back in Brittany, the 2nd Rangers were enjoying a well-deserved 2-month respite when they were called upon to join the fighting in Hurtgen Forest. They fell in with the 28th Division under General Norman Cota. Cota, who had personally seen the Rangers fight on D-Day, believed they'd be more than capable of taking Hill 400. First, he used them to replace units in the 112th Infantry Regiment, who'd been on the Hurtgen front lines for some time. As A Company Lieutenant Bob Edlund walked his men through the deep mud and snow, he bumped into an old friend who looked like he'd been through hell. His friend described the German force on Hill 400 as the meanest son of a bitch that you've ever seen in your life. He told Edlund, "I wish you wouldn't go up there." As if to accent his point, Edlund's men were met with their first taste of German artillery from atop the hill. "It's the purest hell I've ever been through," Edlund said. "Just round after round of crashing and smashing, beating on your head till you think there's no way you can stand it." As the Rangers moved closer, they realized how badly the 112th wanted to escape. According to Captain Sid Solomon, they left their clothing, weapons, and equipment behind as if they'd vanished into thin air. More disturbingly, the prior regiment had abandoned their wounded and dying. One Ranger medic recalled entering a German troop shelter where they found several injured Americans. The Rangers dug in, but were immediately met by the cold weather. Lucky for them, General Dwight D. Eisenhower decided to pop into the nearby command center. According to Lieutenant Edlund, Eisenhower didn't understand why the battalion didn't have new boot packs and fresh winter gear. They were still in summer clothes as temperatures in Western Germany approached the low 30s. That's when one of the men cried out, "Hell, General, everybody back at headquarters has got them." A few days later, Edlund's men had everything they needed. He said Eisenhower must have raided the whole damn headquarters to get enough for one Ranger battalion. By late November 1944, the 8th, 9th, and 28th Infantry Divisions had all tried and failed to take Hill 400. During the first week of December, the 5th Armored Division tried again, but its units were quickly repelled. Morale was low, the hill seemed insurmountable, and the 8th Division Commander General Walter Weaver desperately needed a fighting force that could finally break through. The 2nd Rangers were at the top of his wish list. With approval from high command, Weaver bussed the Rangers to the bivouac, or base camp, below Hill 400. From there, they'd laid out the assault plan. Companies D and F would lead the charge on Hill 400. Meanwhile, Companies A, B, and C would take position on nearby ridges, set up roadblocks, and pepper the Germans with mortar fire while their allies advanced. Finally, Company E would stay behind with tanks from the 5th Armored Division. They were to act as reserves and help should the Germans launch an expected counterattack. D and F companies moved into position on a partially sunken road near a church and cemetery. The attack began at 07:30 and would not end until 40 hours later. From its position on the sunken road, Company D looked out over an open 100-yard field leading to the trees. Unfortunately, the only way to Hill 400 was to cross no man's land. During World War II, German artillery units were known to fire behind their targets. Then they'd begin walking the fire in, forcing their target to advance or take cover. The problem with advancing meant you were likely walking into relentless machine gun fire. It was a rock and a hard place, and that's exactly where the 2nd Rangers found themselves stuck shortly after sunrise on December 7, 1944. To make matters worse, friendly artillery was firing upon the hill. Companies D and F had to wait for the American barrage to end lest they charged straight into it. Tensions rose. German mortars were landing about 75 yards behind them and getting closer. The men had a feeling that German artillery would reach them before their own barrage lifted. That's when a newly appointed officer ordered a scout to run ahead. He took 4 steps and was immediately cut down by machine gun fire. His death was the spark everyone else needed to charge. They sprinted across the field, firing their Tommy guns blindly at the hill. I never saw a more brave and glorious sight, Staff Sergeant Bill Petty of F Company recalled. It was a moment I was proud to be a Ranger. One crucial fact to remember is the smaller size of a Ranger company during World War II. Unlike typical infantry companies that contained 193 men, Ranger companies only had between 63 and 67 men and their officers. Historians say about 130 men between companies D and F charged Hill 400 that morning. Only 100 of them ever made it to the top. Those who made it across and up said it was worse than scaling Pointe du Hoc on D-Day. There were no ropes or grappling hooks. The ground was slippery from snow and as steep as a ski slope. Men had to climb hand over hand while using their third hand to keep up a stream of fire, as one veteran puts it. Private William Anderson, Sergeant Petty, and Private First Class Cloyce Manning were the first men up the hill. When they arrived, they found a German bunker armed with heavy steel doors and shoot-through ports. Petty stuck his BAR through the port and emptied a 20-round clip. To finish off anyone inside, Private Anderson shoved a couple of grenades into the opening and stepped back. Just then, a piece of German artillery landed next to Anderson, killing him instantly. More of companies D and F arrived and quickly drove the remaining Germans away. By 0835, about an hour after the initial charge, Hill 400 came under Allied control. They took 28 prisoners while the rest retreated toward the Roer River. That said, the Germans would let 400 go without a fight. The first of 5 German counterattacks began at 0930. According to documents captured during the war, Field Marshal Walter Model had promised Iron Crosses and a 2-week leave to any Germans who reclaimed Hill 400. Artillery peppered the hill as D and F companies tried digging in. As one veteran recalls, there were screams of dying men. The smoke burned our eyes and nostrils. It was horrific, and the voices of the wounded tore our hearts. Although they successfully fended off the first counterattack, it came at a significant cost. Of the 100 men who made it up the hill, only 50 remained standing. Many were wounded, some were dead, and others suffered casualties beyond physical injury. For example, one of the newer replacements watched his fellow Ranger's head get blown clean off by German fire. The man stood about 3 feet away, and the sight rendered him speechless. He didn't remember his name and couldn't recognize anybody around him. They evacuated him off the hill, and he wound up in a psychiatric ward back in the States. Back on Hill 400, those who remained enjoyed the same terrain advantages the Germans once had. The trees and high ground allowed a small band of 50 men to fight with a force of 500. But more men perished as the counterattacks continued through the 7th. At times, German forces outnumbered what remained of companies D and F 10 to 1. By noon on December 7th, only 32 men remained atop Hill 400 to fend off the second German counterattack. By then, Lieutenant Len Lamel was the only officer in Company D left standing. Lamel was in rough shape though. His left index finger was almost severed, and he was bleeding from his ears due to German artillery landing all around him. They needed reinforcements, and they needed them hours ago. Unfortunately, General Weaver couldn't muster enough men to relieve the 2nd Rangers. They were on their own until help arrived. They didn't know when that would be. According to Lamel, that second counterattack came inches away from working. As the Germans advanced up the hill, Lamel turned to see his platoon staff sergeant Ed Secor spring into action. Unarmed and out of ammo, Ed grabbed a pair of machine pistols from 2 wounded German soldiers. He then led a desperate, borderline suicidal charge toward a sizable German patrol. He screamed and hollered and fired like a madman. The charge was enough to inspire his men, who quickly followed in his crazy footsteps. The Germans must have thought 100 wildlings were charging right for them because they spun on their heels and retreated down the hill. Sergeant Sakor's wild charge brought them valuable time. It also helped confuse the Germans regarding how many men remained on the hill. Back at camp, Major George Williams mustered 10 men from E Company to scale the hill and reinforce Companies D and F. They arrived moments before the 3rd German counterattack and witnessed why Hill 400 was so important. An American forward observer, First Lieutenant Howard K. Kettlehut of the 56th Armored Field Artillery Battalion, had a 360-degree view of the German countermeasures. As soldiers approached, Kettlehut rained American artillery down upon them. It was enough to stave off the 3rd counterattack and another that followed around 1500 hours. Most of the gunfighting ceased as night fell on the first day. That, however, didn't mean it was safe. Germans shelled the Rangers atop Hill 400 all through the night. Meanwhile, medics from both sides raced up the hill to evacuate their dead and wounded. It was a death factory, Lamel said when describing that first day. One way or another, they got you. You froze to death, you got sick, or you got blown to bits. December 7, 1944 was my longest and most miserable day on Earth. The 5th and final counterattack was two-pronged. Shortly after dawn on December 8th, German paratroopers attacked Company E from Obermaubach to the north. Lucky for them, Lieutenant Kettlehut was wide awake and ready to conduct more artillery strikes. His precision drove the German paratroopers back, thus saving Company E. Kettlehut then focused his barrage on where the Germans were preparing for one final counterattack. He peppered them for 20 minutes, forced them off the hill once and for all. As night fell on the 8th, General Weaver finally gathered troops from the 13th Infantry to relieve the 2nd Rangers. They were a welcome sight for battle-weary soldiers who'd been fighting non-stop for 40 hours. According to battle reports, the Rangers were down to a quarter of their original strength. Over 100 were wounded, 19 were dead, and 4 were missing, possibly captured. Sadly, 9 days later, the Germans overtook the 13th Infantry and reclaimed Hill 400 for themselves. The Americans wouldn't take it back until February 1945. In the end, the Battle of Hurtgen Forest was considered a stalemate. Both sides saw heavy losses, with the Americans suffering up to 55,000 casualties compared to the Germans' 28,000. Some historians question whether the battle made tactical sense. One describes Hurtgen Forest as the most ill-conceived and unnecessary offensives of the whole northwestern Europe campaign. Some believe American forces failed to recognize the importance of Hill 400 until the late stages of the battle when it was already lost. Things may have turned out differently had they taken it back in September. They can argue all they want, but they'll never diminish what the 2nd Rangers accomplished during those grueling 40 hours. Those who scaled Pointe du Hoc on D-Day said the climb up Hill 400 was far worse. In the end, Lieutenant Edlin describes it best, calling it the purest hell I'd ever been through.